But hey, that's just a theory. A game!
Yeah, I'm covering game theory again, and before people get on my case, I was already working on my last commentary when this theory was shoved in my face by several people on Twitter, Discord, and even people who were getting new to my channel as of late. Hey people, how you doing?
Get off the stage!
Alright, so before we actually begin, I need to pick apart some words. First, I want to draw attention to a part of MatPat's pinned comment, which I do admit was interesting to say the least, but what's interesting even more is this line. There were a few facts that this one that I either forgot to double check because I assumed I knew them off the top of my head, or I could have explained better. And this is interesting because there was another comment that he posted saying, I checked it with two other people who know Persona really well. Mother's Basement and my personal friend who recommended the theory in the first place. They checked both the script before I recorded it and final video. Sometimes people just overlook things.
Nasty.
Yeah, these are kind of conflicting since you're saying that you didn't double check, but in this comment you're saying that two people double checked your work. I understand that people can make mistakes, but it really seems odd that these two people who are huge fans of Persona yet apparently don't know the difference between Margaret and Elizabeth, especially since they're both integral to their respective games' social link systems. I don't know, it feels like passing the buck, and we'll be getting to the Elizabeth segment when we get to it, but if there's nothing else, then
That only prompted a lot of backlash of people saying he doesn't acknowledge criticism. Still, I tried addressing negativity and people criticized me for doing that too, saying I was bad at taking criticism because I did that. It often feels like a lose-lose situation.
Like, is any of this for real? Or not?
Oh my god! This is an non sequitur!
MatPat, do you realize that people took issue with how you address criticism? I mean, look at this thumbnail, reacting to the haters, and how you react without the entire live stream.
Then not all the rest of the videos we're gonna watch today are me and you guys.
Alright.
Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up.
Not the haters! Ah! The haters!
There it is, there was the scream.
That doesn't count.
Nothing weird, nothing strange going on. I just want to talk to you. Come on.
A fan base that I have no doubt is sure to hate whatever I say in this episode, regardless of how much research I do, poking holes in the theory as a result of that aforementioned contradictory lore.
Say some gangsta is dissing your fly girl. You just give him one of these.
You never see it come back. You say that my mind is
This opening itself. I mean, I had to go back a little to the criticism thing, because not only are you agitating the fans of Persona, but you're also creating a shield to block any criticism while doing this. While I don't care for your jokes and such, there was a lot of potential for joke material here with Persona 4. But nope, you essentially decided to do this! Look, I understand where you're coming from, but right out of the gate, you are being overly defensive and belittling the people who are fans of the franchise. It almost feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's also a franchise with enemies that look like this, or this, where teenagers unleash their powers by doing this. Just know that the YouTube monetization bots are gonna be all over this episode. So the bots are gonna hate it, the fans are gonna hate it, and the people who don't know the series probably didn't click on this thing in the first place. Which leads to perhaps the biggest question about today's episode. Not so much what happened to Yu's shadow in Persona 4, but why the f did I choose to do this episode?
Actually, the better question is why you chose to even use those images in the first place, MatPat. I mean, if you're so worried about this monetization thing, you didn't need to put them in there. I mean, the theory has nothing to do with it. I get you're going for a joke here, but it's kind of stupid that you put them in here when you're worried about putting them in here.
Nothing weird, nothing strange going on. I just want to talk to you. Come on.
A recap for those of you who haven't played Persona 4. Or, honestly, those of you who've forgotten all the details because, like I said, it has been a decade. Sorry, I don't mean to rub it in or anything. Time affects me too, you know.
Bad idea.
Oh, you guys have no idea how funny that is, hearing that.
I'm a brave boy.
Who I henceforth deem the Scooby Gang.
Not a brave enough boy for this!
Now, all the main characters in the game go through this process, and I do mean everyone, even Teddy, who we learned through his social link was himself a shadow when all of this started.
I was just a shadow in that world.
He eventually faces a shadow version of himself and gains a persona of his own. Everyone goes through this process. Everyone, except for the fearless leader of the group, Yu. Yu gets himself a persona. In fact, he gets his first, but his just shows up right before the tutorial fight where he battles some generic enemies. He just hears a voice telling him to call forth
what is within.
And he gets his persona without ever having to fight a stupid-looking boss. Throughout the entirety of the game, we never actually meet Yu's shadow. And that sent my theorist sense a tingling. It's just such an odd pattern to break. Everyone else needs to meet and accept their shadow in order to gain a persona, but Yu, the main character of the game, completely neglects this part of the process. But
we've seen Yu's shadow. I mean, there's one in the fighting games, and there's one in the anime. We see a shadow, but to be fair, I'm going to focus on the main line of the games for this. Okay, I know that later he brings up counter-arguments here for how people debunk this theory. Yu's power was immediately awakened after shaking hands with...
Can I touch your hand?
And in fact, if we look towards other parts in the series, we can see that a lot of people have their personas already awakened without ever having to deal with their shadow. Persona 3's cast never had to deal with their own personal shadows. They were able to get their personas. I mean, Persona 5's cast never had to deal with their own personal shadows, with the exception of Futaba, who actually had to accept her shadow, much like how Persona 4's cast does. So we know there are multiple ways to access your persona, not just confronting your shadow self.
I'm here today to say that it's been staring us in the face the entire game. That's right. What I'm proposing is that Teddy, sweet, lovable, cuddly, Humpty Dumpty-esque Teddy, is secretly Yu's former shadow. Now, that at first might seem like me trying to put together pieces that don't really belong to try and retrofit an answer. We have one character who, for no apparent reason, is missing a shadow, and
can I touch your hand?
Actually, no! As already demonstrated, persona can be manifested in different ways. As I've talked about with last time with how Futaba was able to get hers by actually accepting her shadow, Persona 4's Yu can also be the same way. As we look towards Persona 2, Philemon actually endowed a lot of the people in the game with persona. And the same thing happened to Yu in Persona 4, where Izanami gave him the gift. It's completely possible for that.
we have another character who was a former shadow and has himself a mysterious backstory that he just so happens to not remember.
Teddy isn't a former shadow, he's a shadow through and through. He just so happens to have his own human identity that allows him to leave the Midnight Channel area. We see this happen in the game since when he disappears, he loses human form and is stuck in his bear form. Secondly, see my last point, Yu's persona was already tamed and awakened for him to use.
I'm a brave boy.
Add the two together, stir well, and boom, you got—
Not a brave enough boy for this!
You can reject everyone except for Teddy. It is impossible to become the world's savior without Teddy's support. The game literally won't allow it to happen. There is no separating the two. As Tom Cruise said,
"You complete me."
Almost like a shadow and its own.
Except that goes against everything we know about tamed shadows. Teddy doesn't get to become your persona. I mean, this kind of is an outlier. If we were to accept this theory to be true, then where did Izanagi come from? Is Teddy a part of that? Was he broken off? You kind of have to prove that if that's the case. And even then, just because you point out to an outlier, that doesn't mean that, hey, that's not the case for the other outliers that I've already explained. He could have just been given the persona. He could have been awakened to it. And considering the fact that we see Adachi have like a similar persona, heck, it's called Izanagi as well, then it's more to the point that they were possibly given these personas.
But that's not all. One part of the game that often goes overlooked is the Velvet Room, a place that exists between consciousness and subconsciousness, where Yu meets the creepy-looking Igor and his assistant Elizabeth. Or honestly, those of you who've forgotten all the details because, like I said, it has been a decade. Sorry, I don't mean to rub it in or anything.
Well, that's just embarrassing. You know, this is one of the reasons why people think that you don't play the games you're covering. The reasoning is that with you getting Margaret's name wrong, and as I'll demonstrate for the rest of this video, there are other factors that line up with this belief that you don't play the games that you cover.
I played the first Ace Attorney game, I did a theory about it, and then the fan base just ripped me apart because they're like, well, in episode 4 of the series, you know, everything you say is proven true, and of course he's villainous and this and that. Like, I didn't know.
So I'm going to acknowledge that this might be a bit of a non sequitur, but it is going to be proving my point on a few things I'm about to elaborate on. But in the case of the Ace Attorney video, first of all, it's Game 4 where you're talking about. And no, not everything you said comes to light. What is brought up to light is that Phoenix Wright was disbarred for using illegal evidence that was proven to be falsified. In your theory, you claim that you played the first game. However, if you did, you would realize that evidence law in Ace Attorney doesn't work like you claimed it did. Case 5 proves that, and evidence law for it actually is doing that. I'll put a link in the description if you want to read the evidence law, because it has a lot more different than what our real-world law is, and it does really negate a lot of MatPat's theory. But my point is, if you actually did play the game, you would know this fact. So either you didn't actually play the game, or you're admitting the evidence that actually proves that your information is wrong about the theory. Either way, you're kind of being disingenuous here. And now, back to our featured program! Hooray! Margaret is a prominent character in Persona 4. She's a social link and a character you need to interact with in order to get stronger personas. And she's even a boss character. A secret boss that you need to unlock, but still. And while she has similar design elements with Elizabeth, it's not hard to tell the two apart, especially since Elizabeth doesn't even show up in the game. And I wouldn't stress this, but apparently there were two people who checked MatPat's script and they should have caught this too if they were huge fans of Persona like your comment suggests. So either y'all are extremely fake as fans of Persona, MatPat is passing the buck, or you're lying to your audience here. I'm sure there are other reasons for this, but it's just something I have to consider. Look, I realize that this is the harshest criticism I've given to MatPat, considering while this doesn't disprove anything in your theory, what it does show is that you're not paying attention to the game, and quite possibly not even played the game.
To do things like fuse personas and get long-winded lectures about the game's themes. During our first visit to this shagadelic ride, we learned that it's a place that's only accessible to those who've received a special invitation. Quote from the game,
"Only those who are bound by a contract may enter."
And in Persona 4, the only people able to enter this room throughout the entirety of the game are you, Igor, and Igor's assistant. We never once see anyone else enter the Velvet Room.
When Igor says the line that you mentioned earlier, right after that he says you doesn't have a contract.
It is a room that only those who are bound by a contract may enter. It may be that such a fate awaits you in the near future.
So, you doesn't have a contract, but he's able to enter the Velvet Room. Hell, Igor says this.
In the coming days, you will enter into a contract of some sort, after which you will return here.
So, obviously, if you didn't have a contract at the beginning of the game, by your logic, he shouldn't have been able to enter into the Velvet Room in the first place. Funny how you seem to ignore this little line that's in the same cutscene. Then again...
No one, at least, except for Teddy. He seems to just stumble into it, almost as if completely by accident. And there, he and you just sit around and have a conversation.
Unless he was summoned there, you know what Igor tells you that he does?
It seems the words in your memory weren't the only things you summoned here.
In fact, let's go back a bit. Igor says that the room is a place where egos can be nurtured.
This is a room for guests who have an ego that can be nurtured. Shadows, mere fragments broken off from the ego, have no place here.
This means anyone with an ego.
Now remember, Teddy is a being who started off as a shadow and seems to have no real history before humans entered the TV realm. He has no connections to Igor and his contract, so it makes absolutely zero sense that he'd be able to enter the Velvet Room when no one else can. That is, unless you consider that there's something more to his identity.
I only summoned you here that we might say our farewells. I am rather surprised, though. I did not expect your friends to follow you here. It seems the power of the wild card within you has influenced them as well.
My name is Igor. I am the master of the Velvet Room.
I am Lavenza, a resident of this place as well. We have been waiting for all of you. Velvet Room?
Remember, shadows are a part of the original person, the parts of themselves that they don't want to confront. If Teddy is Yu's shadow, that means that Teddy literally is you, or at least a part of you. Therefore, he too would be bound by the same contract that Yu's under, and thus able to get inside the Velvet Room. And if that wasn't enough, what's even more interesting is that this happens at a point in the game when Teddy is beginning to question the very nature of his own identity. Coincidence? I think not.
MatPat, you already acknowledged that personas are tamed shadows in this video.
Just so we're clear, a persona is just like a shadow. It's a manifestation of a person's inner thoughts, but a persona is actually tamed and trained.
Personas and shadows are the same thing. That's why you're able to fight them in the first place. But sometimes, humans with special awareness can tame their shadows. Those are persona users.
and a person's shadow and persona are one and the same. Yet you're pushing this theory. Yeesh, this is exactly like the Ace Attorney video where you show one thing that contradicts your entire theory. Especially since Yu's persona is Izanagi. He already had his shadow tamed, or awakened because of Izanami. And while yes, Teddy isn't what you would call a regular shadow since he has a shadow self and a persona, you're also forgetting that he has a human form, which looks nothing like you. The one trait that all shadow selves have is that they have yellow eyes, something that Teddy does not have.
Thing that Teddy says to you upon entering the Velvet Room is,
I've been thinking all this time who I really am.
Oh really? Maybe the answer is staring you quite literally in the face.
Well, I could say the same to you. He answers his own question in that scene.
I've been thinking all this time about who I really am, but I couldn't find the answer. I was no one from the start. Humans live in the other world, and shadows live in this world. From the beginning, that's all there was to it. I was just a shadow in that world. Shadows can't stay in the human world. They aren't allowed. One day, a shadow living in that world awakened to human emotions. But humans and shadows are completely different entities.
Now, just to address a counter-argument that's probably already coming, other people enter the Velvet Room in other Persona games. Minato in 3, and pretty much everyone in 2 as just some examples. But remember, the Velvet Room that we see in Persona 4 is unique. It looks like the interior of a limousine, making it physically distinct from the booth-like appearance of the Velvet Room from earlier Persona games.
Have you even touched the other Persona games? The Velvet Room manifests itself in different forms in all games. In the first game, we had its simple blue and carpeted draped rooms. In Persona 2, we had more of a club feeling going on with the design. Persona 3 was an elevator. And Persona 5 is a prison! You could say the first two are similar, but at the same time, those two games are more connected.
Igor meets you for the first time and refers to this place being off limits to anyone who hasn't entered into a contract with him.
Which at this point in the game, you hasn't.
It is a room that only those who are bound by a contract may enter. It may be that such a fate awaits you in the near future. In the coming days, you will enter into a contract of some sort, after which you will return here.
Sorry, I don't mean to rub it in or anything. He's referring to that specific place, that specific Velvet Room with the limousine appearance. Notice how none of the other Velvet Rooms have that sort of contractual stipulation. So the rules of one room in a past game shouldn't necessarily apply to the way that Persona 4's room chooses to operate.
It is a room that only those who are bound by a contract may enter.
It is a room that only those who are bound by a contract may enter.
Only those who have signed the contract can enter this place.
He's referring to that specific place.
Warning! Warning! Bullshitter alert!
You know, at this point I'm willing to say you haven't played any of the Persona games.
Counter-argument number 2. Teddy isn't Yu's shadow because Yu doesn't have a shadow. Yu is special. He's the chosen one. And I could totally see why you might think that. Over the course of the game, we learn that not just anyone can enter the TV world. As we find out, the only way that people can enter the Midnight Channel is by going with someone who's been granted this special gift from the gods.
Actually, you just need a persona. Hell, the game tells you this since when Teddy goes missing, the others actually search the TV world without you.
Rise and the others are checking inside the TV to see if he's gone back to the other side.
Yu just so happens to possess the gift. So maybe the fact that Yu has the god's blessing explains why all his friends encounter their shadow in the TV world, while he never has to. It's an explanation that would make sense if we didn't have evidence directly to the contrary. You see, it's revealed that only 3 people have received the TV gift. Yu is one. The other 2 are Namatame and Adachi, the villains of the story responsible for throwing innocent victims into the TV world. And it's here that the explanation of Yu is special doesn't hold up, because both Namatame and Adachi have the gift, but both still have shadows who appear in the TV land. Namatame and Adachi both merge with their shadows when you fight them as bosses.
You see, this is a point I was referring to earlier. You see, these aren't Namatame and Adachi's shadows respectively. This right here is Kuino Sagiri, and I know I'm probably butchering that, but I don't care, who has many shadows merging with Namatame. We see this happen in the game. outright shows you this! And for Adachi, he was absorbed into Amino Sagiri.
All humans will become shadows, and I shall descend upon the united world as the master of order.
Guys, this isn't Adachi. It's someone completely different.
Both this world and yours will soon be enclosed in a fog that never lifts. It will be the peaceful world that mankind has longed for.
Who are you?
I am Amino Sagiri, one who rules the fog, one awakened by man's desires.
These are not their shadows, so this argument does not work.
Nothing weird, nothing strange going on. Just want to talk to ya. Come on.
News Arcana at the top of the game is the Fool, which represents innocence, divine inspiration, madness, freedom, spontaneity, inexperience, chaos, and creativity. In nearly every regard, he's the embodiment of a blank slate. Now, if the player reaches the true end, Yu's persona ascends to the World Arcana, a representation of totality. Look at Teddy's Arcana, the Star, which is associated with hope, self-confidence, faith, altruism, luck, generosity, peace, and joy. These match exactly with what we know about Teddy. He's all about cheering people on, getting along with others. But in addition to matching Teddy's personalities, these are the exact traits that Yu has to adopt for himself in his evolution from spontaneous and experienced fool to hero of the world.
Your point about the Star Arcana is kind of irrelevant here. You can easily say that for other Arcana that can fit into the world's description, since the world is associated with social links. That's kind of the purpose of the game. The Magician has elements that align itself with self-confidence, Fortune has luck, Temperance has harmony, and the Sun has joy and optimism, and etc. When you say words like totality, that doesn't just mean good aspects of just Teddy, it means the whole thing, and that's the point. That's why the World Arcana in Persona represents the social links, meaning all of them. Not just Teddy's.
Can't think of a better way to demonstrate exactly that. Well, outside of making it a bit more obvious so it doesn't take a theory 10 years after the fact to expose the truth.